welcome to Ivanti Service Manager. In this course, I'm going to give you an overview of validation objects and pick lists. We'll talk about what a validation field is. We'll talk about some of the uses for validation fields and point out some examples in the system. We'll talk about who can create validation business objects and fields. We'll talk about what a validation business object is and how it might be used. We will talk about pick lists and how those are used within the system. Then we're going to create our own validation business object and our own pick list. Once we've got that set up, we'll link the pick list to a field and put values in the validation business object. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm currently logged in using the self-service user role, which would normally be your customers. And you're going to see validation fields in here as well. So let me choose Report an Issue over here. And fields where you see a drop-down, for example, urgency over here, there's a little drop-down. The data that's in there, excuse me, is coming from a business object, and then there's a pick list that links the data from this business object to this field. So that's how you'd be able to actually select those. So as far as uses and examples, there's one, use and example. I'm going to change my role now to Service Desk Analyst. And you're going to see a lot of, options in here. So let me open up Incident. And I'm just going to open up an existing incident here. And you can see within here we have a lot of drop-down fields. So the drop-down fields are hooked to a pick list, and the pick list is linked to a business object that's holding that list of data. Now you can use the same business object with the set of values and the pick list and connect them to multiple fields. So the benefits of doing that is you're going to get consistent data in the fields. So you're not going to have people in here, spelling out E-mail service or, email, SVC, different abbreviations and things like that. Everybody's going to pick from the same list of values, so the data in that field would be consistent. And when you've got consistent data in a field, it makes it a lot easier to search for things and even for reporting. So if somebody's got the administrator role, they'll be able to get to the configuration console. Click on this little wrench here. And from there, they can build business objects and pick lists. Okay, so let's build a validation business object. We'll actually talk about what they are as well. If I come over here to the left-hand side, you're going to see validation business object. Now, the business object that holds our list of values, that can be, it doesn't have to be a validation business object. It could be another, business object in the system. What makes the validation business objects different from your other business objects is that validation business objects are, used primarily to populate drop-down fields, in other business objects. Validation business objects also have static record sets, meaning that, if I come into the user interface and I'm selecting from a list of values, we don't want these values changing all the time. Okay, that wouldn't be a good use of a validation business object. Okay, so they have static record sets, meaning that they very rarely change. And then another thing that's unique to the validation business objects is that they cannot have defined relationships. So we learn in another course how to create relationships with two different business objects. And so we would not be able to use that as a validation business object. It does not mean that we can't connect to it and use values. It would just need to be, a regular business object and not a validation. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go in. I'm going to start from my home up here, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a business object. But let's take a look at what we're going to create it for first. So I'm going to come over here to the user interface. Okay. And what I want to do is when somebody's logged in using the Service Desk Analyst role, let me just close Incident. So back to our hotel reservation setup, I'm going to click on that and just open up a record, which I have one right here. So we're going to do one for, how about bed size? Okay, we got our hotel. What kind of size bed do you want for your room? And they're only going to have a few options here. So this would be a good use for a validation business object and a pick list. All right, so I'm going to change my role back to the administrator role. And I currently have the configuration console open, so I'm going to click on that. I'm going to come over here to Validation Business Objects. Okay, I'm just going to collapse this panel so I have more room. I'm going to click on Add New, and then give my business object a name. Okay, tab down. Now remember the display name we can put spaces in. Okay. All right. I want to point something down here in the lower left. This says Pure Validation Object. This is what makes this a validation business object as opposed to a standalone. So if you've created a standalone business object and you want to turn it into a validation business object, you can check that box right there. Okay, so now I'm going to add my field or fields. It's got the standard 6 fields that are always there when a business object is created. And I'm going to add a field. And I'm going to come down here and it's going to be a text field. Okay, and before I fully add that, I want to let you know that in the user interface, I have that field that's called bed size, okay, and it's a text field. So just an FYI, the field on the validation business object has to be the same field type as the field in the user interface that you're going to populate. Now, out of the box, we talk about this in the other business object class, but out of the box, often the text fields are set to Unicode text, which is fine. Just leave those alone, and when you're building the validation business object, just change that to Unicode text. I field a name, and it's going to be called bed size. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and don't really need to change anything there. I'm going to leave it as is. And I am going to check full text indexed, meaning that when somebody's in the user interface and they're on the hotel business object, they'll be able to type in the simple search and it's going to search this field right here. Okay, not required, but we can do that. All right, so now I'm going to come in and I'm going to add this field. And we can't create a form or a list or a layout with this on it until it's been written to the database. So I want to get rid of the new by saving. Okay? I have to have a form, list, and layout to get my data in there and to see my data. So I'm going to go to Details and just Auto-Generate UI. Get rid of Auto-Generated there. And OK. Okay, so it took all the fields, all 7 of them, and put them on my form and my list, and then I have a layout. So remember, you can go to your, form. I'm just going to get rid of some of these fields that I know I'm not going to use. All I want is the bed size field. Okay, and then save that. If I want to edit the list, I can come over here, click on List, right here, And notice it puts all the other fields there, so if I don't want any of those, I can take them off. Okay, and then this one here, if I want to be able to sort or group or anything like that, I can. Normally you're not setting up a whole lot of sorting and grouping in a validation business object, but I should at least make it sortable. Let's just do that one there. Okay, and then the list properties, if you want to have a default sort, you can come in here and choose that. Remember, you can't have a default sort unless you've selected at least one field to sort on. Okay, I'm going to save that. And then back to my business object here. So that form and that list are now part of that layout. Okay, so this is going to hold our values. Now what we want to do is we want to create a pick list. The pick list is what connects this list of values with the fields in the other business objects. So I'm going to come over here to the left-hand side and you'll see pick lists. Just collapse that. Add new. All right, something like that. Business object. I'm looking for that validation business object that I just created. Okay, so hotel room bed size. That's the business object that's going to have the list of values. Now, display field, value field, and sort by field. When I'm in a business object, okay, and I click on something, what I'm seeing right here is the display field. Okay, so I'm going to set that, bed size. Now the value field. A good example of the value field would be over here we've got the owner. The display field is showing you that owner's first, middle, and last name. However, once we make a selection, the value that's actually stored in the field is their login ID. So over here, these could be different, but I'd have to have another field on my business object. An example I use sometimes for the display, the value, and even the sort by would be, let's say I have a list of colors here, okay? And when I pick a color, I actually want the code for that color stored in the system. So this is the display, and then there's that code. And then as far as the list goes, they're normally in alphabetical order unless you create another field on your validation business object, for the sort order. So that way you could have them, in this case, the order that they might be selected. If it was back to my color reference, you could have it sorted by the most popular color. So if you want to have a different value stored and then also customize the sort order, on your validation business object, the one I created a minute ago, I would have to have those three fields, one for display, one for value, and one for sort by. Now I didn't do that. I'm just going to use the bed size for all three and then save. Okay, so now what I have done is I've created a validation business object that's going to hold the list of hotel room bed sizes. And I've created a pick list that says to get the information from this business object, okay? And then finally, this pick list is what would be connected to the field in the business object. Okay, now I'm going to go to my business object, the one that's going to have the drop-down list in it. So I'm going to go over here to Business Objects. And what I'm looking for is our hotel, our Avanti Towers reservations. And then I'm going to go to Fields. And one of the fields over here that was created was the bed size. So what I would do is I would select this, and then I would come down to right here where it says Pick List and Validate, or Validated. Tick that box right there, and then pick the name of the pick list that I just created. So over here, so I called mine Hotel Bed Size List. Okay, Now, Edit is going to show you what that pick list looked like, so what the settings are. So I can see what I set up on that pick list. And then we also have values. This is one of several places that you can add values. So I'm just going to click on Values right here, and then Add. And then here I'm going to put in a twin, add again, and I'm going to put in double. Oops. How about queen? King. Okay, so I have some bed sizes there. You see that it put them in alphabetical order. I'm going to close this. And so now I'm going to save this because remember I altered the field there. Okay, so I'm going to go test that out in the user interface. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to switch my role to the Service Desk Analyst. So I'm going to go to my Service Desk Analyst and go to my hotel reservations. All right, customer walked in and they want a room, and now you can see the drop down where I can pick the different bed sizes there. Okay, I'm not going to save that. Okay, so now you've learned to create a validation business object. You've learned to create a pick list. You've learned to change a field so that it now gets its values from a pick list. Okay, so to get some help with validation objects and with pick lists, I've listed a couple of places here. Using the help within the product, go to Home, Administer, and then Using Pick Lists. The other place you can go to look for information is Home, Administer, Using Pick Lists, and then Using Validation Business Objects. Remember, that's the one that holds the values. And then, as always, be sure to join the Ivanti Insider program so you can network with peers in your industry. Prepared a few exercises for you. So the first one here is create your own validation business object. Next, create a pick list. Add some values to the validation business object, and then connect that pick list to a field.